start now. Yeah, you can start, Janani. Thanks.
Yeah, okay. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. It's good to finally be in the in the meeting. Yeah. So my name is Janani. I am an alumna of Center for Linguistics, JNU. And I currently work with Oxford University Press on their Oxford Global Languages project, which tries to create digital dictionary, bilingual dictionary content for what they call digitally underrepresented major world languages. So I'm working with the India chapter of the project. So I'm a linguistic consultant for the Tamil, English-Tamil dictionary, and I'm also the lexicographic advisor for whatever future languages that we'll work on. So my training is not in lexicography, but it's sort of my I've always loved lexicography, dictionaries and things like that. So it's been an interesting experience so far, and I wanted to share some of the insights that comes from lexicography. So I don't know if is the presentation on screen? I'm on the chat window. So, yeah, okay. Not yet. All right. So initially my talk was just very bland bilingual lexicography, but I have now renamed it, Beyond 50 Words for Snow, Puzzles in Bilingual Lexicography. So what I'm hoping to achieve, slide please. Next slide, yeah. Okay. So what I'm seeking to achieve through this talk is, so these are my goals. So I want to present some puzzles that linguists or lexicographers might be faced when they're working on a bilingual dictionary. And I want to present a certain orientation towards dictionary making that can help in approaching these complex issues, because dictionary making is a very complex process in itself, and bilingual dictionaries are, you're dealing with two languages with different structures and various other issues, so they are much more complex. So my talk is going to focus also on what kind of orientation can help with dealing with some of the issues we face while creating dictionaries. So what I will not aim to do is give answers to the puzzles. Sorry about that, because as I'll keep emphasizing during this lecture, we'll see that the answers to these puzzles depend on a lot of different factors. Most importantly, the goal of the lexicographer involved, and the goal of the project, and the languages involved as well. So they're not answers to the puzzles, but they're just ways to think about the puzzles. And I'm also not going to present a novel analysis, any novel analysis of grammatical forms. So I'm not going to present any new ways of analyzing languages. It's more about how you apply whatever analysis you already have of a language, whatever understanding that you have as a linguist of certain languages. Okay, next slide. So I also want to establish that this is a very, very complex issue, as I said, and my talk will simplify it a great deal, and maybe it might even be simplistic sometimes, but that's just, I think, that's just the nature of the talk that I'm trying to give. So, okay, next slide. No, actually, yeah, just stop here. Yeah, sorry. So what is lexicography? So one part of my talk title was, yeah, lexicography. So lexicography is the science of both the theory and the practice of dictionaries. So it's not purely theoretical or purely practical. And it doesn't involve only dictionaries, it also involves other knowledge systems that can feed into dictionaries. So there's a whole list here in this definition that I've taken from an author. So it can be knowledge based on encyclopedias, lexica, glossaries, and specialized vocabularies, technical knowledge bases, basically online sources, lots of different places, corpora, and other information tools. So all of these need to be dealt with under lexicography in order to build dictionaries. And a closely related field of study is lexicology, now, which is the science of investigating the lexicon of a language. So that would include things like its historical development or etymology, the social stratification, as the definition says. So the social information about the language, the ways in which the language encodes certain aspects of meaning. So all these things are covered by lexicology, and some people would consider lexicography sort of the applied discipline of lexicology associated with lexicology. But a lot of lexicographers are opposed to this idea as well, because lexicography has its own specific theoretical component. So it's not simply the practice, it's also the theory. Now, having said that, my talk today will mostly focus on the practical aspects of lexicography, because I think that would be quite useful. But obviously, like any practitioner would tell you, there's no practice without theory, and there's no theory without practice. So a lot of the things we discuss will feed back into the theory. I will also make reference to some theory maybe, and then but my focus is not on theoretical questions per se. They would be mostly on practical questions. All right, next slide. So then we come to the other half of the talk title, bilingual dictionary. So what is a bilingual dictionary? I think everybody knows what a bilingual dictionary is. It's a dictionary that helps to translate words, idioms, and phrases from one language into another language, as a very basic, simple explanation. So in bilingual dictionaries, there are two important concepts. So the source language and the target language. So the language that you're, so if you have a Hindi-English dictionary, Hindi, usually it would be, if it's titled in this way, it would mean that Hindi is the source language. The head words, or rather the words that you look up in the dictionary, the words you would find is the first element of every column on the dictionary, the head word, the lexical item you're looking up would be in Hindi. So that would be the source language in a Hindi-English dictionary. Now, the target language is obviously the language that the word is being translated to, or that you're giving equivalence for. So these are just two terms that I want you to keep in mind. So some people use L1 and L2, but I don't prefer that terminology because it has other implications, and I don't want to confuse that here. So we'll call them source language and target language. So there are various types of bilingual dictionaries, and so the choice of the type is decided by who your target reader is, and we'll be discussing more on this. So also I want to say that translating for a dictionary is very different from translating a text, because a text it has a lot of context. It's always a contextual translation. I think most of us would know this as linguists, that translating for say an interlineal gloss, that is probably closer to what a dictionary requires. So dictionary making has a very specific type of translation that you need to do. So yeah, all right. So beyond that, we will now talk about the types of dictionaries. Next slide. So there are monodirectional and bidirectional dictionaries. So again, which dictionary you want to create depends on what your goals are, right? So a monodirectional dictionary will just give you, will have only one source language and one target language. So if it's a Hindi-English dictionary, it will only be a Hindi-English dictionary, and that's all there is to it. And a bidirectional dictionary, on the other hand, will have a Hindi-English side, and then it'll flip the side and it'll work on an English Hindi side. So where the headwords will be in English and the translations will be in Hindi. So the other type, I mean, there are various typologies of dictionaries, I guess you could say, like you can talk about advanced learners dictionary, those kind of things, but these are the main types of bilingual dictionaries that I'm dealing with here. So there are definition dictionaries, you know, where again, lexicographers call these many different things, but a definition dictionary is basically where you have the headword in the source language, and the target language does not give the equivalent of the word. It just defines what the word means. So it doesn't really tell you, say a word in a Hindi English dictionary. If you take a word like din, which means day in English, it doesn't give you the word day. It gives you, it explains what the concept of din is in English. So that's what a definition dictionary does. A word equivalent type of dictionary will give you the what you would use in place of din in English. So it would give you the word equivalent, which is day. Okay, so all right, next slide. So as I said, the purpose of the dictionary and the end user would often decide a lot of things about the dictionary. So it can decide anything from the type of words you include, the level of detail you give for the dictionary, and lots of things like that. So let's go over some of the purposes that your dictionary could have. So one is you might want to help native speakers of the target language interpret words in the source language. So these are called reception-oriented dictionaries, where the point of the dictionary is to help the target language, I mean the native speaker of the target language, understand the words of the source language. So in a Hindi English dictionary, if your main goal is to make sure that the English speaker understands what the Hindi word means, that would be a reception-oriented dictionary, where you're not really interested in helping the English speaker produce Hindi. You're just helping them understand Hindi. Another point would, the second one would be to help native speakers of the source language figure out how to say something in the target language. So that would be a production-oriented dictionary, because you're helping the native speaker of the source language actually translate. So for the first kind, you might have, say, a tourist who's in a new country. They just want to know, they see a signboard and they just want to know what it means. So they would just look it up and they would understand what the signboard means. For the second type, you might have a language learner who wants to figure out how to say some word in the target language. Say a Hindi speaker wants to know how to say, let's go back to our favorite example, then in English. So then they would look it up and they would, the dictionary would tell them how to say it. So that's a production-oriented dictionary. Now, another kind of dictionary is a translation dictionary, which is, I mean, not every dictionary is a translation dictionary. Some dictionaries are specifically meant for translators who are a specific kind of user. So that would have certain assumptions. It would assume that this person is fairly competent in both languages. Obviously, native speaker, or yeah, you would assume that native speaker of one language and fairly competent in the other language. So then you would have a translation dictionary, which is again a production dictionary, because you want to help them produce text in the target language. And then there are dictionaries that you would use for endangered languages. These are interesting because a lot of linguists do produce dictionaries like this. So, so there may be two ways you can create dictionaries for endangered languages. One is where you document an endangered language. I would say that these would be mostly reception type of reception-oriented dictionaries, because in documentation, you're just trying to sort of create a record of the knowledge. So you want people to be able to understand what the endangered language words in the endangered language mean. So, I mean, experts can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I would see it as mostly a reception-oriented dictionary. On the other hand, when your goal is to revitalize an endangered language, you would have a reception and production dictionary, because yes, of course, you would want people to understand what the words of the endangered language mean, but you might also have second generation, younger generation learners who don't actually know the words in the endangered language. They might know the word in, say, a majority language. So they might want to look up the word in the majority language and learn the word in their, they would want to, look up the word in the majority language and learn the word in their native language, assuming that that's the endangered language. So then they would also want to produce, say, text or speech in the endangered language. So it's also production oriented. And then we come to dictionaries created for machine translation, where it's mostly production. Um, so, so you need to decide what type of dictionary you want to make. What is the purpose of your dictionary before you even start making the dictionary? Because as I said, there are many, many aspects of the dictionary that will be decided based on this. Of course, there are always practical considerations, like, what format is the dictionary, if it's print, how much information can you include, and how much money do you have. But purely in terms of the lexicographer's theoretical sort of questions, you would want to consider these kind of questions. And even if you already know what your purpose is, even if you have already made up your mind, it is still important to keep in mind these various differences of purpose, because you might just find yourself falling into questions or trying to solve problems in ways that are not relevant to your type of to your purpose. So next slide. So yeah, we can stop for a few questions, and if you have any thoughts on what could be some issues in bilingual dictionaries, you can share that on chat.
So right now we don't have any hands. Anybody, if you have a question or a comment, please just raise your hand. Click on the raise hand button.
All right. So should I move on?
I think you should for now. And if you have a question, I'll bring it in later.
All right. Okay.
Okay.
So let's look at some of the issues and puzzles.
Janani, there's one raised hand.
I had talked about. Sorry.
There's one raised hand. Do you want to take it now or later?
Yeah, I can take it now.
Okay. Archana, please come in.
Hi. So, Janani, could you please elaborate more on definitions dictionary? I didn't quite get it.
All right.
You said there will be only the definition and not the equivalent word. So, what sort of dictionaries are those? Like, are they for specific purpose, like law or any specific topics or such?
Yeah. So definition dictionaries are I can think of say for a law dictionary you might have a definitions dictionary, but when you're talking about bilingual dictionaries, they are usually used by people who have no knowledge of the source language at all. So where you don't know actually what the word's basic meaning is. So the definition dictionary would help, say, a language learner understand what the word means. So it would give a full grammatical sentence maybe as a definition of the word. So let's say the word din. So if you look it up in a definitions dictionary, so it would tell you the something like, okay, not exactly this, in a more dictionary like way it would phrase it as the portion of the 24 hours when between sunrise and sunset maybe, that's usually the definition of a day in many Indian languages. I'm not saying that is the only definition, but so it might give you an explanation of the word, what the word means, right? So in a bilingual context, it need not be something very complicated to understand, like a law glossary, or like, explaining linguistics terms, or things like that. It could just be even the basic word meaning, and it just helps the user understand what the word means.
Maybe a silly question, but then isn't it easier along with definition if we can provide the equivalent word, because that will make it much more easier as a user. So I'm just wondering what sort of users this is directed to. As a
Yeah,
user, end
so
user, I would prefer an equivalent word along with definition.
yes, so most many dictionaries do that. So they will give you an explanation and they'll give you an equivalent word. So I think on that slide, if we could go back to that slide. Yeah, types, the slide that says types, number 5. Yeah, so it says Tamil Hindi or Tamil Hindi, right? So this should be, yeah, Tamil Hindi. So this might give you a Tamil word, give you the sorry, this is not the one I was talking about. So it could give you the word, it could give you an explanation in the target language, and then it could give you the equivalent word as well, right? So it could take a day, like it could take a word like din, it could give you the definition of the word din, and then in English, and then it could say day. So that would be useful. So since you are you understand what day means, that would be useful to you. But if you are a completely new, so day is a very trivial basic example, but if you had a more complicated word and you don't know what the word means at all, you might just need a definition. You might not actually need to know the equivalent word, because you're just interested in, so that would be a reception oriented approach. You're just interested in understanding the language. You're not really interested in translating the language or anything like that. You just want to know what the word means. So it's like a regular dictionary where you don't know the meaning of an English word, you look it up and it explains to you in simpler English what that word means.
Okay.
Right? That's how a regular monolingual dictionary works. So a definitions dictionary is similar, except that it explains to you in the target language.
Okay.
Sorry, in the source language, what it means.
Yeah, got it. Thank
In
you.
the in the language that you know what it means. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Janani. Please carry on.
Yeah, all right. So can we go back to slide 8? Yeah, so some of the issues and puzzles. So what are some of the common issues we can anticipate in a dictionary? So I was hoping for some audience ideas, but yeah, since there's nothing, I will talk about what are the most obvious ones that come to mind. So this is where I got like the idea of the title of my talk, which is like, Inuit has 50 different words for snow. So we've all seen those memes and images that are shared which say this, that the Eskimos have 50 words for snow, because so, and then they draw their conclusions on what it means about the language and culture and all that. So we're not going into those complicated questions. I'm just saying that there is this kind of idea that the main problem between languages is that there is no lexical equivalence sometimes. So that's the most popular imagination. I'm not saying linguists think that, because yeah, we also understand structure and things like that. But these are the popular ideas of the problems you can have about when it comes to translation. And this is an important issue. I'm not making light of it. It is a very important issue, and it is taken seriously in lexicography. But since we are mostly talking to linguists here, I want to consider different types of issues, other types of issues. Next slide. So I want to look at issues of grammar, parts of speech, So this is a very common issue, particularly in production-oriented dictionaries, because production-oriented dictionaries do not have the space to explain that, oh, this is used, this part of speech, this is a verb in English, but it's used differently in another language. So it doesn't have the space to go into those explanations. It just, production-oriented dictionaries usually give word equivalents. So then, when you have a word equivalence dictionary, you don't have the space to explain the differences. So this becomes a very important issue. So this is because languages, as we all know, they encode information differently. So in different parts of speech, what is expressed through a verb in one language may actually be expressed through something else in another language. So for instance, if you have the head word notice in English, and it's a noun, and there's a sense of notice which is which means warning, right? In the sense of, if you're coming next week, please give me some notice, right? So let me know ahead of time that you're coming. So that sense of the word is in the dictionary. You're supposed to translate that into any language, let's say Tamil, because I can tell you what happens in Tamil. So in Tamil, we wouldn't say, the word that means notice would not be involved at all. We would just say something like, please tell me beforehand, or something like that. So you see here that you cannot give the direct translation of notice as a noun here, because what is conveyed by notice as warning is actually expressed, when you practically use it, it would be expressed by a totally different the grammatical strategy. So you would have like a verb phrase or something, tell me beforehand, right? So these kind of mismatches tend to be very complicated to deal with, because how do you accommodate it within the minimal space that a dictionary gives? So, and then of course, some languages may not even lexically express very common concepts at all. So let's take a verb like complain. Can we go to the next slide? Next slide. Hello?
I'm on the slide that shows complain. Is that the one you want?
Okay. Sorry. I think mine hadn't updated. Yeah, this looks fine.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So a verb like complain, right? So in English and in any language, complaining is such a basic human concept. So it's not that the concept of complaint doesn't exist, but you can use it as a transitive verb in English to say, I complained that the water was cold. But in Tamil, there's no easy equivalent, right? So you have a head word like complain. You can say, I mean, an option is something like kuraisul, which means fault, literally fault say, or find fault, not exactly find fault, but yeah, roughly you can say that it means find fault. But it isn't easy to use it in a sentence like this. I would not use this word when I talk about complaining that the water was cold, right? Do Tamil speakers agree? Okay, I hope you agree. So then I think that these type of things happen in other Indian languages as well. So then how do we approach
There's a yes,
translating?
by the way. So
Sorry?
there's a yes. Tamil speakers agree.
Yes, yes, I see. Yeah, okay, thanks. So if I could translate this in a text, right, I would just naturally establish the situation that, you know, oh, I wanted hot water, I didn't have hot water, so I went to the manager and I told him, like in Tamil I would say, I told him that there was no hot water, and from context I can understand that this is a complaint, but I would not actually use the word kuraisul ever to say this sentence. So then how do we approach? Yeah. Yeah, tell mistake, as Madhu says. Yeah, tell mistake. Yes. So can we go to the next slide? So how do we approach translating this? So as I said, you'll have to think of the type of user and what your goals are. So if you're helping native speakers of the target language, interpret the words in the source language. So if you're helping the native speaker of Tamil understand what complain means, I would like some audience participation here, but
Yeah.
so how would you, yeah.
But there is a word for complaint in Tamil, right?
Which is?
Puhar.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yes, that's a great point. So puhar is, would you use it in the sentence, I complained that the water was cold?
Yeah. I mean, not in this context. Yeah, really. The
Yeah.
the context will be different. Like it will be like
Yes.
a complaint to the police or something very serious. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, yeah, the more lesser point is that puhar is not a verb, right? It's not a transitive verb. So you would have to say, yeah, but that's not really an important point right now. But yeah, exactly. So puhar, if you use that word, it would be like to register a complaint. It would not mean. I mean, other speakers of other languages can also join, and you can try to think of how you would do this in whichever language you speak. I mean, language other than English.
Yeah, so basically we can use in the transitive way also, but then we use in complex verb like we say puhar plus do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you can do that. You can give that as a translation, but it would not be helpful if you're trying to give the sense of something informal, right? Yeah. And even in English, you wouldn't simply say that you complained. Yeah, you could actually say you complained to the police, but if it's a formal complaint that you give a puhar, then it would be like you lodged a complaint with the police, right?
Yeah,
So
right.
yeah, so these type of complications will come up because you have to make sure that it means exactly the right thing, right? So and it's also the right register. It has to be formal or informal or whatever. So yeah, so to go back to the type of user, if you want to help a native speaker of Tamil understand complaint or complain, sorry, if you want to, you would have to take a different approach. You know, if you could just give like a definition of what complain means. You could say that this is when you are to express dissatisfaction or something. You would say that in Tamil, like you would give an explanation in Tamil saying to express dissatisfaction.
Janani,
Yeah.
Gopal is saying, I wouldn't use complain here at all. I can't think of any word that works here.
Yeah.
And Nupur says that in Hindi, I can think of shikayat, but that means telling on, nothing that directly translates complain. In Bangla, we have nalish kara. So nalish is the verb and then the do verb goes on. Sorry, nalish is the noun and then the do verb goes with that. So nalish is to complain. So
okay, right. Okay, so I think Bangla might have the easiest way of explaining this because it also means semantically the same thing, right? It expresses the same idea.
Yeah, that's
even if the form is slightly different, it uses a light verb. But yeah, basically it forms a verb together.
Right.
So yeah.
I'm sorry. Archana says in Marathi, I can use takrar in this context.
Right.
Takrar. Sorry. Yeah, please carry on.
Yes. So this, I mean, in Marathi apparently it's possible, and in Bangla it's possible. So depending on the language, of course, there'll be gaps in things like this. You would think that complain is such a common thing to say, but it may actually end up being quite difficult. So yeah, to go back to what I was saying. So depending, if you are trying to help the native speaker of the source language, that is English, if you are trying to make the English speaker help them figure out how to say this in Tamil, it would be a little more complicated, right? Because they will have to be told that, sorry, we don't exactly have a way to say this in the exact way that you mean. We have other ways of saying this. So then the way you structure the entry would be different. So I would do something like, I would use maybe a less formal word that does not work, or a more formal word that does not work. I might give them, just to give options, and mark them as informal or formal, you know. So that would help the native speaker. It still won't help them know exactly how to say that, but at least it'll tell them that there are more and less formal words, ways of saying this. And of course, you could give an example and just translate the example, right? So that would be one way to do it. And if you are helping a bilingual translator with complaint, that would be much easier, because you would understand that the bilingual translator is likely to have competence in both languages. So you might need to give less information to them. And in this context, if English was an endangered language, and you were trying to document English, and you had to say what complaint means, again, you would use more of a definition, I think. And if you were trying to revitalize English because it's dying, oh no, then you would give an explanation, but you would also take more of the option number 2, right, where you were helping native speaker figure out how to say something. So you would do that as well. You would try to give a word equivalent. So this is extremely simplistic. This is a very, very simplified form of how you would actually solve this problem. But as I said, I'm not trying to give you answers for this is how you have to deal with it. I'm just saying these are the ways you can think about this problem, right? So right. So I would like to move to a more complex example now, right? So which is, adjectives. So like anybody who has worked with grammatical categories knows adjectives are complicated when you come to Indian languages, especially when you're trying to place it in the context of say English. Okay, let me also clarify that I'm not trying to say that English is important. I just happen to use English because in a bilingual context, it's easy if we have one language that we all have a common ground on. So that's the only reason I'm using English. I'm not trying to say English, bilingual dictionaries involving English are more important or anything like that. So yeah, just fair warning. So the adjectives are interesting because they present lots of challenges in terms of parts of speech. I think we've had some talks. I think Anjali's talk and Hima's talks both touched on how adjectives can be analyzed, and like the complications that are involved in adjectives. If you look at the category, especially in relation to English, it becomes even more complicated. So we'll consider 2 types of adjectives, and the problems they pose to the target language. Slide. Okay. So English adjectives are usually of 2 types, right? Attributive and predicative. So what we have here is beautiful. I saw a beautiful cat today where beautiful is this is an attributive form of beautiful, where it appears before the noun and it modifies the noun in that way. And how would this be translated in an Indian language? So
in Bangla we'd say আমি আজকে একটা সুন্দর বিড়াল দেখেছি. So সুন্দর is the adjective.
Yeah. Okay.
Archana,
Sundar, Shundar. Okay.
Archana says me ek sundar manjar pahili. So sundar is
adjective. Yeah, I saw that. So sundar in Marathi and shundar in Bangla. And in Tamil we would say aragana. So araga means beauty and an sort of the
Hello.
Yeah. Sorry, I was reading Archana's, Anupama's comment. Yeah. So if you, I'll take the Tamil example. Okay. So when I say Aragana Pune, the ana there is usually used to is a suffix which you add to the noun and it becomes an adjective, right? So it's an adjectival suffix. Aragana. Okay, we can. I know there can be a lot of debate about this, so I'm not really focusing on the what is this suffix, what exactly does it do. I'm not looking at like a linguistic analysis of what ana means there, but I'm just using it as an example to say that this is one of the ways in which we produce adjectives in Tamil. So I saw a beautiful cat today would be நான் ஒரு அழகான பூனையை பார்த்தேன். Okay, so அழகான. Okay, so next slide. The cat is beautiful. So this is the predicative form of the adjective where you know it's still the adjective, it's the same form. In English this is considered an adjective. So this would be, how would you translate this in Bangla or Marathi? Sundar ahe. Yeah. Right. And in Bangla? Okay, this would still be Shundar.
Yeah, ওই বিড়ালটা খুব সুন্দর বা সুন্দর, just without খুব.
Right. Okay, so
sorry.
Yeah.
We'll still say
okay, so you drop the. Sorry?
I'm sorry, you drop the what?
You don't use the copula there, right?
We don't usually use a copula anyway, so.
Yeah, right. So in Tamil we would say andapuna. Yeah, exactly, Madhu. Aragaga irukkirathu or irukku. So aga is usually in Tamil it's an adverbial suffix, right? So it sounds like we are saying that the okay, yeah, you can also say Puna Araganadu, but that would be like that's a beautiful cat, right? Again, nominalized, right? Right. So yeah, so there are lots of different ways, right? So you say it in one way when it's attributive and in a completely different way when it's a predicative form. So now both of these are considered adjectives in the source language, but not necessarily in the target language, right? So how would you accommodate? Would you put down all the forms of say you're doing just a direct equivalence sort of a translation? Would you just list all the different forms of beautiful in your target language? So would you say Araganadu Aragaga, Aragana, and Sundar, Sundarahe. It's weird to say like, no, Sundar you can use because it's the same for both. But in Dravidian languages, it becomes more difficult because there are so many different forms. So would you give all the forms? So this is something to think about. So I would anybody like to share how they might approach this? Right, maybe in Gopal says, maybe in Tamil's case, list just the base noun and note the suffixes separately. Yeah, that could be a way to do it, but how would you, would that be the ideal way to help the user? That is the question, right? So where would you list the base noun and where would you note the suffixes? Would it be in the same entry? Yeah, so yeah, but that's a good way to start thinking about it, right? Like if I'm a user, if I'm an English speaker and I want to look up a word in Tamil or Marathi or Bangla, yeah, so yes, sentence examples would actually solve the issue, right? Because you can, but then if you want to give this is sort of similar to, yeah, so you could give sentence examples, but then would you want to give a direct translation for the head word at all, or would you just not give anything and just give sentence examples? Because that means the user doesn't really, if you want to create a production dictionary, for instance, a production oriented dictionary, the user wouldn't really be able to use it productively, right? Like he or she or they would only know how to use it in the context where the example would be appropriate. Okay. Madhu, I'm not sure what you mean by different lexical entries. Do you mean like?
Yeah, I meant like alahana, arahaha, like I think it won't work.
Yeah, you could do that, but you will also have to, like, if you're just putting down aragaga and aragana, you will have to still explain to the user what the difference is, right?
Yeah.
That's a good idea, and you will have to do it to every adjective that uses ana and aga. You'll have to give two.
That's what I thought. It won't work for the dictionary.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good idea, and there are certain dictionaries where you can do that maybe. Like if space was not such a major limitation, like in a digital dictionary, that might be a good way to do it, yeah. So I'm not saying any of these are bad ideas, I'm just saying that you will need to think about, okay, is this really going to help the user or not? And Shrika's question, sort of similar to monolingual dictionaries too, right? Usually the usage of a word is not, yeah. Yeah, so in a monolingual dictionary, it's easier because you don't have to accommodate a target language's user and their expectations, right? You can just say, okay, sense one of this word means this, and it's like a word like rock. So sense one of rock means this. Sense two means like. Okay, rock is not a good example.
To rock,
those are
like
to
chill, and maybe that could be one meaning you could look for.
Sorry?
To rock, like rock and roll.
Yeah. Or pen, right? You can take pen, and these are two, it has two different meanings. One is a writing instrument, and the other is where you keep animals. You sort of keep animals in a pen. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah, so yeah, one option is to introduce predicative versus attributive in definitions of grammatical terminology, Asha says. So yeah, that's an option. Yes, and again, that would also depend on your user again. I know this is getting old, but that's actually what we deal with every day. So that's why I keep bringing it up again. So what kind of dictionary do you want to have? Do you want to explain grammatical concepts? Yes, then yes. That would make sense to give grammatical notes, and we could do that sometimes, right? So you give grammatical notes because it's not always easy to just focus on words, sometimes you do need to give grammatical information. So that is also another option, depending on your target user.
I'm just wondering, Nova's question, but would that also depend on the language? Because in a language like Bangla, there's not much difference between the attributive and the predicative adjective, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
But with the language like Tamil, I believe it's necessary.
Yes, exactly. So, yeah, so of course, the issues are very language specific. So, it's, yeah, I thought I mentioned this. I'm not sure if I did, but yeah, it's not only the user, but of course it will vary from language to language, right? So the needs of your dictionary will not be the same. So once you work on a dictionary from another language, then the needs of your dictionary might completely change, and you might have to throw out all the decisions you made for the previous language, right? So yeah, it varies from language to language. Right. So I had one more example to discuss, but I think we can skip that because I think this has been quite clear.
You
So,
can still
but
go. You can still discuss
okay.
it. That'll be fun. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, the hungry one. Yeah. So again, this is it depends on the language, of course, but I have a feeling this is something that is more problematic for more languages spoken in India. So I mean, yeah. So the hungry students demanded better food in the mess. That's an adjective. And I am hungry. So that's also an adjective. When I started I think in my MA, that I could not believe that I am hungry is, like an adjective. Maybe I was just very stupid, but to me, it could not be an adjective, like, because it sounds like a verb to me, right? But yeah, so, but yeah, so how would you say this? Yeah, we can go around again. How would you say this? How would you say I am hungry? I mean, you might say it in different ways, but how would you say it in your language? So in Tamil, we would say, enakku pasikkudu, right? For me, yeah. Yeah, you would use a dative subject in Tamil. Buklalia. Buklalia. Okay. I'm not going to try to read because, yeah. Booki hu aur mujhe book lagi hai. Okay. All right. So there are many different ways of saying this. So again, it's the same, it's a similar issue, right? Yeah. Me book ke liye aahe. So that is closer to the English, would you say, Archana?
So in Tamil, sorry, am I interrupting?
No, go ahead.
No, carry on.
What
Yeah.
was the question?
Sorry. In Tamil, if we have to use with the copula, I am hungry, then it's the same as the beautiful sentences we had. Like we use that suffix for adjective and adverb. We use the suffix adjective in the first sentence, the hungry students, and the adjectival suffix in the second one, I am hungry.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So can you say it? I'm not making the connection.
So in the first one, the hungry students, it will be oh shit, I forgot.
Pasiyana, Pasikunda.
Yeah.
It's very weird.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
Pasiana students. So it's the ana is the adjectival suffix like in beautiful.
Yeah.
And I am hungry. எனக்கு பசியாக இருக்கிறது. So the one you said is a reduced one where we don't use a copula. எனக்கு பசிக்குது.
Right.
And the two is the default agreement, right? Because of the dative. Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So so in this case, okay. Sorry if I'm being very Tamil centric, but yeah, this is easier for me to explain. So let me explain this. So enakku pasikkudu, as Madhu said, it's a reduced form of the adverbial suffix, but the subject here is dative. right? So when the subject is dative, so do we need to mention this to the English user of the dictionary? Do we need to explain what a dative subject is? Because most of them are flummoxed by it. They can't really understand what we mean. So yeah, Aisha says no. I assume no, we don't need to explain it to them. Yeah. Okay. So yeah. So depending on the if you're assuming that the English speaker knows at least a little bit about the language, or they're in a grammar class and they, so basically, yeah, I agree. You cannot explain this because this involves a lot of grammar, and you probably are making a dictionary and not a grammar book. If you have the space to make a grammar book, then yes, I would say go ahead and explain the grammatical concept, but most dictionaries don't. So most dictionaries would omit that information. You can give an example and just show that information, right? It would be the easiest thing to do. It would be more useful to the user also. You can show this you can maybe give 2 or 3 examples and show the usage of this word. And that would, if nothing else, it would at least alert the user that, okay, there's something complicated about this, and I can't just go about randomly saying pasikidu and in any context. So yeah, are there actually before we come to
Sakshi Bhatia had a question, and Meraba's hand was raised earlier. So,
okay.
So Sakshi says, for adjectives which inflect, would you include that information in the dictionary? Like hungry in Hindi and Urdu would be bhukha or bhukhi.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So you might choose to have a default form, right? You might just say, okay, I'm going to consider masculine and the default and give only masculine forms, or feminine. So you might then say, or you might just say, yeah, I'm just going to take feminine as the default form. But I think the most useful thing to the reader might be to either, I mean, if you think that your user might not at all know these issues, again, like the dative subject, what does your user know? If you think that your user would know that this might inflect for gender, then you can omit that information. But usually I would say you should give a default form and make sure that the user is aware that this is just the default. So you can maybe mark it as masculine so that the user knows that there's a feminine form, and you might want to use an example that shows the feminine form, right? And then, yeah, then if it's a language that inflects for number also, then, I mean, which is possible. So then you might have to encode that information also, but you will need to decide whether you want to give it through examples, through grammatical notes, or through, okay, so, yeah. So you will have to decide what your strategy is going to be based on the what you assume about your reader or your user.
Mairaba had a question. Mairaba, will you come in?
So this has been more of a practical problem that we've been going through, and I can we do this later, because I think this is going to take quite a bit of time. Because for the languages that we're working, should I continue, or should we take this at the end?
You could take it at the end if you think it's a broader question.
Or I think we discussed this at the end.
Okay.
Cool. All right. Okay, so we're almost at the end. I'm on slide. I'm now going to move to slide 16. Can we move to slide 16?
Oh yeah, sorry, 1 second.
Yeah.
I completely forgot I'm doing this. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So questions to think about. Okay, so these are sort of like the kind of things I was trying to, the directions I was trying to point towards. So who is the target user? The second question we didn't get into much, but it does matter. How does the directionality of the dictionary impact the way we accommodate mismatched parts of speech or other non-equivalent elements? So if you're not doing, you know, a reversal dictionary, so then is that going to affect the nature of your translations? So will there be times where you think, oh, this can be sorted out on the other side of the dictionary, right? So a lot of case information and things like that. Okay, so I think I will skip this point for now. And if anyone is interested, we can discuss this. You can email me or something and we can discuss it. But so there's also the question of, do we privilege the source language or the target language, and why? So by privilege, I mean like in a bilingual dictionary, do you try to accommodate? I have been assuming that you will only try to accommodate the source language's, you know, eccentricities. So you will definitely try to just explain all the uses of the adjective, the English adjective in the target language. But some people might not want to do that. They might wish to sort of give focus more on the target language and its eccentricities. And if you like, in my opinion, if you're doing that, you will have to really think about why you're doing that. But usually you would privilege the source language's structure, right? Because that would end up being more useful for both speakers, native speakers of both the source language and the target language. And yeah, so that's about it. If there are other questions and discussions, we can.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Aisha says,
you can move to the next slide and then we'll be done. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So Aisha says, I think the use of examples is useful for wide-ranging phenomena in the language. Use grammatical notes when you have clearly morphological word class distinctions, but teaching grammar is just impossible.
Yeah. Yeah, examples can be very useful when you're doing things like idioms. You know, like idioms are the most difficult part in some part of translation in some ways, because if you want to do a production dictionary with idioms, you would want to have idioms as you know, translations. Hopefully you would have a similar idiom in the language. So yeah, examples can sometimes just cover a lot of complications. And grammatical notes when you have clearly morphological word class distinction. Yes. Yeah, but
continues,
a dictionary cannot.
Yeah. You're reading that. What is interesting is that the covert question behind all this is that dictionaries are not about the lexicon.
Right.
Yeah, and Vyom wants to know, also the idiomatic use of words is required, like satta ki bhook, par hungry. I guess this would not be in use in all the languages.
Yes, but if you were creating a Hindi Tamil dictionary, and I am not sure what satta ki bhook means, my Hindi is extremely rusty. So yeah, I would want to know. I would want to look that up and know what it means. So again, like, how much are you going to accommodate? How many words are you going to accommodate? So if you were creating a dictionary for someone who is moving to Delhi and wants to learn Hindi, then these would be really useful, because I could just look it up and I could know what it means. So yeah, I mean, I'm just giving you a very, very specific example, but yeah, so that's where the
And Archana wants to know, very culture specific idioms.
Yeah, culture specific. Yeah, that's a major issue, right? Because I was reading somewhere that I think Khasi doesn't have the concept of okay, sorry, I'm not going to go into something that I'm not sure of, but yeah, we all know there are culture specific idioms or even concepts that will not translate, which is like, again, the 50 types of snow, or 50 words for snow. So those you would use glosses. I mean, what lexicographers call glosses, which are basically definitions, right? The kind of definitions we were just talking about. So you would just explain what the concept is, and you would explain it in the language of the intended user, so that they understand. So if I was doing a Hindi English dictionary, I would explain it in English, right? So this is what this means. And I would maybe try to give an equivalent word or phrase, but yeah, I would have to explain it, yes. Okay.
Karthik wants to know, how do we decide the purpose of a dictionary? Do we burden the dictionary with the sole task of teaching?
Yeah, I'm not sure what, and yeah, I wanted to go on ask this as well. I wanted Aisha to elaborate on the last point. But yeah, so Karthik, the purpose of the dictionary. Okay, so as I said, you decide the purpose based on your target user, right? Like what is it that you are hoping to achieve through the dictionary? I'm not sure what you mean by the sole task of teaching. As I said, grammar cannot be taught in a dictionary unless, I don't know, unless you're building a very specific kind of dictionary for a small set of very specific users and you know what their grammatical needs and you have the space to explain that. But I wouldn't really call that a dictionary. But if I've covered what you meant, then we can move on. Or
Gopal has a question.
May I just intervene? Yes.
Yeah.
So then we need not assume dictionaries to list all the possible inflected forms and all the possible usage of the words, right? So if it is not the whole, so if you are looking at the dictionary only from the perspective of teaching as a learner trying to learn in the form of a product trying to learn, is a point. So then we need not necessarily burden the dictionary with the role of teaching itself or informing about all the aspects of the grammatical use of the word. If you start doing...
There's a difference between teaching grammar and listing inflected forms, right? Listing inflected forms doesn't really teach unless you give grammatical notes for every form, which would be slightly crazy in my opinion. But there are dictionaries that list all the inflections, but then the problem would be that it would reduce the number of headwords, say, or you would need to have, I'm assuming, you would have a lot of space to explain all the, like, to list all the inflections, right? There are dictionaries that do that, but they don't necessarily teach anything. They just list the words. And if you are a learner of that language, that would be really helpful. It's enough if the basic words are listed and their inflections are given. You're learning the grammar from someone else and you're just looking up the dictionary and you know, like, for like what type of verb it is. And in French, for instance, if you have a type of verb and you know, you want to know all the ways it inflects, then
so basically dictionary is not the sole teaching tool. It should not be seen
not at all. Not at all.
Should not be seen as teaching.
Okay, Gopal has a question. How would you handle formal informal variants in a diglossic language like Tamil? If, say, the diglossic language is that target language, would you list both formal and informal variants?
Right. So if the target language is Tamil, this is really, even I'm getting tired of this answer, but it depends, right? So if you want to give, if you want to create a dictionary that that is useful for someone who wants to both write and speak Tamil, then you might give both, right? But because they are very distinctive, like they are like two dialects of the same language. So, but normally you would just pick one. Normally you would just, if you're trying to help somebody, if your target user is somebody who wants to be in a Tamil speaking place and wants to just get around and speak Tamil, then you give the spoken version, the spoken variant. And if you want to help someone who just wants to be able to read Tamil or translate into Tamil, then you would give the written variant.
Okay. Aisha has answered Sahardanya question. So if we consider a monolingual dictionary, we go to it to expand our knowledge of lexemes and the lexical relations between them. But when we ask the kinds of questions that we have discussed today, then this isn't the focus. I mean, if that helps.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. Yes.
Okay,
So
Ritesh has 2 questions. Will you take that or?
Yeah. I'll just respond to what Aisha
Of
said.
course.
Yeah. So we wouldn't really, in a bilingual dictionary, I don't think we go to it to, expand our knowledge of the, of either the source language or the target language. Though, of course, for the lexicographer, that ends up happening. You learn so much more about both languages when you do this. But for the user, that is not, that's not what it's about. Yeah.
Okay. Ritesh has 2 questions. Number 1, in general, there is some additional or special strategy to handle complex predicates like compound verbs in English, or in English to Indian language or Indian language to English bilingual dictionaries, or even in Indian language to Indian language bilingual dictionaries. I mean, is there? And are
Right.
they included as headword? Are they used as exact meanings, quote unquote? So, how about you answer that, and then I ask you the next one.
Okay, so in the English to Indian languages side of it, you would give them, it would be acceptable to give just a complex predicate as an equivalent, right? Because it doesn't matter whether it's a VP or it's just a single word, or I mean, it doesn't matter if it's a phrase or a verb, or a single word, or whatever it might be, as long as it conveys the right meaning and it can fit into the same context, in the structure of the sentence, more or less, you would include it, right? So I think what was one of the things that so something like shine a light, right? You would say shining he shone a light, or he shone the torch on the table. So there you might use a complex predicate in an Indian language. You might say for light shine, for shine, you might just say light throw or something like that. So in those cases, you would just use a complex predicate, right? It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be clarified in any way that, oh, this is not, and are they used as exact meanings? Yeah. So okay, and on the other side, if you're doing, and so if you're doing the other direction where the Indian language is the source language, then that would depend on what you consider, what you're going to include as a verb, right? So you might include something like throw, and under throw you would have, or you could have all the light verb meanings of throw, right? So then you could define on the say the Tamil side of the dictionary, the Tamil English side, you could give different senses of the word throw, and you can explain that this is a light verb, and you could explain the light verb usages of the verb. So those would become different senses of the verb. I hope that covered your question. But it's something which, go on.
Number 2 says, this is beyond what we discussed in the talk, but it's something which we are struggling with in a different context. We can skip this question if it needs a long explanation. But how do we deal with borrowed words? Are they included in the dictionary, especially the ones that are borrowed from the target language and may be used in the source language with different semantic range? And where do we draw the line?
Yeah, so borrowings are very interesting because, often it's even funnier when the word is borrowed into the source language, and then you have to explain what the borrowed word means in the target language, right? Because of, as you say, semantic drift, or something like guru. When you use it in English, it has quite a different meaning from what we mean when we use it in say, Hindi. So, yes. how do we deal with borrowed words? Yes, I don't see, I don't see why you would not want to include borrowed words. Tamil has a lot of borrowings from many different languages, and as a linguist, I would say, yeah, that there's no reason to not include those words. But again, it's also the lexicographer's orientation, I guess, what they think about language and how it should be. So whatever prescriptive notions they might have about the language could affect those decisions. But I would say, yeah, you would include borrowed words. And where to draw the line, yeah, that I think we can, it's a longer discussion.
Okay. Hima wants to know about throw. Throw as light verb cannot be used in all sorts of complex predicates. So how do you specify where it's acceptable?
Right. Okay. I just threw out throw off the top of my head. I'll have to think about that one, Hima. Thanks for the question.
So there's pek, diya, and pekna, and I mean, if Hindi helps. So
yeah,
yeah, please.
Yeah. So Jan, so I was thinking, wouldn't it be better to have the complex predicate listed, and say throw is used as a light verb here, instead of putting it in the entry for throw and say that throw is a light verb, which will then be able to will make the users generalize that it can be used in all sorts of light verbs.
Right. So if you look at it from the let's say Malayalam speakers' perspective, would they ever look up that word to know how it is said in English? Right? Whatever the complex predicate is, would they look at? I think they might look it up. Right? So for them that would be useful. So yeah, that makes sense. And if that makes sense. What you said just now makes a lot of sense, because then the English speaker would also gain more from that, because they would also, if they encounter that word somewhere, they would look it up in the dictionary and they would know what it means. Yeah. Okay.
Jan, this is Karthik.
Makes more sense. I agree.
Jan, this is Karthik. Yeah. So instead of so why can't we think of listing another throw, basically another lexeme with a homograph, and call it and give the delexicalized meaning of that word there, like the ECV examples. Like throw has a particular semantic notion that it covers in the ECV, let's say in the delexicalized form. Why can't we list that as a separate item? And why can't I give another list of what all possible verbs, main verbs, can link to this, like a lexical relation?
I'm sorry, I didn't get that at all.
Okay, so for example, the example throw, vidu in Tamil, one is the lexical meaning, which literally push something out of your hand. Okay, and the other is a delexicalized meaning, which will say light verb. So why can't I list the light verb as a separate verb here, as a separate form in the dictionary?
I'm trying to think if that would be useful. Yeah, you can, but I mean, it's also like the convention of what each dictionary's convention is, right?
Yeah.
So for example, some dictionaries don't list homographs. I mean, most dictionaries don't list homographs under the same entry, right? Because if they have a different, if the word origin is different, you don't list them under the same entry. So is there a reason you would not want to list the light? So I'm saying that you can do that. You can have a separate entry with that complex predicate. Or you could even, this is sort of connected to Hima's question. So I'm just sort of linking them both together. So you could do three things, right? You could list them as two separate entries. One, throw one, which is with the lexical meaning, and throw two with the the light verb meaning. The thing you could do is just list everything under light, right? And the third strategy is what Hima said. You could have a compound predicate listed on its own. sorry, a complex predicate listed on its own, and then you could, yeah, just leave it at that. So yeah, that's a good idea, but you might also want to list the light verb under the, I mean, yeah, under the main verb and under its main meaning, because under its lexical meaning, because somebody might just see the word and they might think that it's being used in a different sense. But if they look under that, they might think that it's being used in its lexical, the main sense, right? The literal sense. And then they could look under that entry and they would actually find that there is another meaning to it, that it has a light verb meaning. So in that sense, it might be useful to list it in its main entry. So a combination of both is also possible. Did that answer the question, Karthik?
Yeah, I'm just, not a question, I'm just asking, like, how can we, I'm just trying to visualize this. But Aisha has pointed out it will be too long and too big. For Beilechen's dictionary is 8,000 word entry, just a complex predicate dictionary. So it is like, it will be an endless dictionary then.
Yeah, I also just wanted to point out from experience. So in the work we are doing, we have to translate to Nepali. So I look the Nepali dictionaries sometimes to find out the equivalence or whatever, and I see the light verb meanings. So a lot of for instance, a lot of complex predicates has the light verb padna, parnu. So what I need to do then is to look up Parno, and under that there will be the minor entries of what are light verbs it can enter. That's like Karthik said.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So
we have Shrikar's question, and then Mehraba's hand was up. So I'll just let's bring in Mehraba and then we'll talk about Shrikar's question.
Okay.
This is in sync with what Hima has been saying. And so the main issue that and the practical issues that we've been facing is about, so we're currently doing 3 dictionaries. One is a language which is basically more or less extinct. We're doing a revitalization project about it. So we have collaborated with gentlemen and people from the community who have actually collected, I would rather call it a glossary of about 2,500 words. But now the issue that arises for us is when we actually, how do we put them in different word categories? So we do have those words listed out now, and we have to give them equivalent meaning wherever it's possible in English and in Nepali. But there are issues of translatability which also comes into a lot of points where you cannot have a word-to-word correspondence. Like you said, we need to use sometimes right? And the issue of the different word forms. Because we do not have any other data to claim otherwise, saying that, okay, this is the past form, this is the present form, this is the imperative form, the different forms of the same word. So the strategy that we've been using is just incorporate all of them and try to give a brief grammatical note in between. But it's getting difficult for us to make any claim or give any grammatical categorization to any of it because we don't have the data. So how do we actually accommodate? How do we? So this is one thing that we've been thinking around, and we've been fiddling around. And what we have actually come down to it is that put everything in. So what do you think would be a different strategy that we can work around with? That's one.
Okay.
If you want to get with that one, or I can, And the second
So I think this needs a longer discussion, but I'm not sure your voice is also very faint. I'm not sure I get the exact issue, but it sounds like you don't have enough data to give all the forms. Is that right?
No, there is multiple lexical entries with different, we know that these are different word categories, right? But do we actually treat them as different categories or treat them as different word forms? Or should all those entries be part of one head word, or do we make them minor entries?
I'm really having a hard time catching what you're saying. I don't know if it's just my connection or what, but maybe we can discuss this later.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Is this any better?
It was a little faint, yeah.
How about now?
And I'm on my phone, so yeah.
There's a lot of buzzing happening in the background. Actually, if you don't mind, it's already over an hour and a half, and our connection the meeting might just get over very soon. So can we take a last question? And Mehraba, if your volume gets better by then we can take that.
Sure.
Okay. So Shrikar wants to know, I'm curious about how these dictionaries are organized. Alphabetical like regular monolingual dictionaries, or is there some other criterion that's used? If it's alphabetical, then it'll probably get really complex really quick.
Yes, they are alphabetically organized. Can I ask why? I mean, it would get really complex. Okay, so also...
Yeah, so I was just thinking about the complex predicate cases, like for instance, you list down throw and give and stuff like that. So there's no sense in which the throw as in the act of throwing and throw as used in a light verb are anyway related. And in a sense, even monolingual dictionaries do get complex, right? So you have homophony and polysemy, and both of them are listed in the same place, which is sort of odd.
Yeah. I don't think the complexity will be more because it's alphabetical, because it still works on the same logic. You know where to find it, right? Depending on which the user will just have to be clear about, they just have to be familiar with what strategy is actually being used, so they know where to look it up. But also another thing that brings up is, are we really talking about print dictionaries that much these days? I mean, of course there are still print dictionaries being produced, but a lot of dictionaries are moving online, so the whole question of what order it is in might become less and less relevant as time goes on, because you just look it up, right? You just run a search. But yeah, in a print dictionary, I don't think I'm not sure I still understand why it should be more complex, because if you know what strategy the dictionary is using, you should be able to look it up based on that.
Yeah, okay. I guess it was just like a intuitive thing where at least I prefer like a brief sketch of the grammar and then have all the light verbs in one place and things like that.
Right.
I guess it depends on the user and what the user is using it for. Thank you.
Yeah. And whether the dictionary can accommodate something like that, like giving you a sketch of the grammar. Yes.
Right.
So can we just try Mehraba one last time, or we can move on to thank yous?
Hello, am I audible?
You're very faint.
I think we something wrong with the microphone.
Okay, then if you don't mind, if you could have this conversation later by email or something, because even somebody else said your voice has been very faint.
Sure.
So I'm really sorry, but that's how the connection is today. Hello? Hello?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. If there are any other questions, please raise your hands or we'll call it a wrap for today. Okay, so most of the people who attended, firstly, Janani, thank you so much. It was a very interesting talk. And as you saw, there's a lot of questions that came up and a lot of discussion points. And thank you for doing this. And I'd just like to ask everybody who's attending now, we just want to get a sense of what you felt about Zoomdemic and what you felt about the talks that we've had till now. So can I just have some reactions, please? Just switch on your audios and tell us, please.
Hello?
Yeah, hi.